On a quiet island in Lough Leane near Killarney lies the ghost of an ancient monastery. These ruins were once an important centre of learning that played a role in Ireland's history. Over many centuries, Innisfallen has been visited, not always peacefully, by many monks and clerics, Gaelic Irish, Vikings, Normans, English soldiers, and much later by tourists from all over the world. The monastery on the island functioned as a religious site for almost a millennia, from 640 to the end of the 16th century. It was renowned as an important centre of learning and is perhaps best known for the magnificent and important Annals of Innisfallen. Come with me and let's discover this lost monastery on an island in one of Ireland's most beautiful lakes. You have to get there by boat, something which lends even more charm to the visit. You get this outside Rosscastle and it takes about 10-15 minutes to get there. Get one of the boats that just goes to Innisfallen and lets you spend a considerable time there, as some of the boats either don't land or only allow you a brief visit. These boatmen are great and are very knowledgeable about the island and the area as a whole. Like most things in Killarney, it can get very crowded in summer. Best to visit at a quieter time and experience this beautiful island and special monastery with less people around. If you are lucky, you will also come across some deer on the island. There were several there when I visited. Like many monastic islands in Ireland, the origins of Innisfallen are obscure. It was probably founded in the 7th century. 640 is commonly given as the date of its foundation. Whether it actually was this date is unclear, but it was probably sometime in the mid-7th century. St. Fionn is believed to be the founder, though it has to be asked which one, as there is some confusion around this saint as there are more than one St. Fionn. There may even be 3, though this is unclear. Many believe that the founder was St. Fionn the leper, who is associated with Dublin. This belief dates back to Maelmurra O'Gorman, writing around 1170. However, it is more likely to have been founded by St. Fionn of Cork, the patron saint of South Kerry. It should be noted that in the early medieval period, the kingdom of Cork included both Iveragh and Dingle peninsulas. Indeed, Maelmurra O'Gorman may actually have meant St. Fionn of Cork. This confusion of saints is repeated elsewhere. As Riain shows, in the 1650s, Sean O'Connell, an Iveragh poet, appealed in a poem called Tuireamh na hÉireann to St. Fionn of Lough Curran and St. Fionn of Lough Leane. Both of these are the same person. They are both alternative names for St. Fionn of Cork, who actually founded Innisfallen. There is a life of St. Fionn, and it is quite possible that this book was actually written in Innisfallen. Certainly, Riain argues convincingly that it was. He also shows that this work was more concerned with the politics of the time it was written than those of St. Fionn's actual lifetime. St. Fionn is connected with many monastic settlements, including Church Island, Lough Curran and the Skelligs, as well as other religious sites such as wells around South Kerry. He's said to have been trained by St. Brendan of Ardfert, Kerry saints sticking together. However, Innisfallen was probably his most successful foundation. Undoubtedly, the settlement in Innisfallen followed a pattern similar to other monastic sites. Initially, it would have been very small, probably with a small number of people and with simple buildings made from wood. It was most likely chosen because it was a distant location, far from the world. It was also one of many monastic islands in Kerry. However, it was the most successful, as shown by the construction of an abbey there in the 12th century, whereas, by this time, most of the other monastic islands had been abandoned. Skellig Michael, or Skellig Michael, was probably the only monastic island that came close to Innisfallen in reputation, though ultimately this would move to Ballinaskelligs. Over time, Innisfallen expanded from this small hermitage-type settlement. New buildings would have been constructed. These undoubtedly included a scriptorium, where the annals and possibly the life of St. Fionn were written. The existence of this scriptorium and the works associated with it indicate that the monastic settlement must have become reasonably important. It also gained a reputation for learning, which would have helped it grow, attracting students and new monks. With these newcomers and students, wealth would have come. As Innisfallen slowly expanded, it accumulated riches. However, this wealth attracted unwelcome attention. It was raided by the Norse on a number of occasions. They probably sailed up the River Laugh to reach the Killarney lakes and then attacked the island. In fact, during the 9th century, the Norse seem to have attempted to build a large settlement on the River Main, upriver from Castlemaine on the borders of Cork, Kerry, Lough and the Lough Leane. In the Annals, it is called Dunmania. However, in 867, a coalition of Irish kings attacked them and drove them out. This remarkable coalition involved the kings of Kerry, Lough, the Lough Leane and O'Connell, one of the overlords of Cork. A large amount of gold and silver were captured after the battle, while many women were among the prisoners, leading O'Corran to suggest that Dunmania was a large permanent settlement. Brian Boru is also associated with Innisfallen. He is said to have been educated on the island. However, I think this is more a folk tale, as I've looked for sources for this and have found nothing other than tradition or books from the 19th or 20th centuries. If anyone can give me a proper source showing this is true, please do so. Even if the story of Brian is not true, undoubtedly a large number of young Gaelic nobles from the region and beyond would have been educated there. It was not only the Vikings who attacked the island. Gaelic lords did so as well, often as part of the various conflicts within the Gaelic elites. For example, in 1180, the Annals of Innisfallen record that the monastery was attacked and plundered by Maldwyn, son of Donald O'Donoghue, who made off with much gold and silver from it, though he did not kill anyone or steal any books. This was probably not the only raid on the island by Gaelic forces, though it could have been the worst. It's worth quoting the Annals of Innisfallen here. Quote, "There was committed in this year a deed which greatly vexed the clergy of all Ireland, namely, the plundering of Innisfallen by Maldwyn, son of Donald O'Donoghue, and the carrying off by him of all worldly wealth therein, which was under the protection of its saints, clerics, and consecrated churches. He collected, indeed, the gold, silver, trappings, mantles, and cloaks of Iveragh, without any respect for God or man. But the mercy of God did not allow him to kill people or to strip this heavenly place of church furnishings or books." End quote. Furthermore, in the annals there are many references to kings, important nobles, and high-ranking clerics being buried in Innisfallen. For example, in 1320, Dermot MacCarthy, king of Desmooin, was killed by the Normans, more specifically by the son of Nicholas Fitzmaurice, and was buried in Innisfallen a fortnight after his death. Innisfallen had obviously become a very important place. Shortly after the arrival of the Normans, the Augustinian canons took over the site, establishing an abbey there. It is important to note that most of the ruins on the island nowadays date from this period onwards, with the exception of the oratory. However, it is possible that the abbey incorporates part of the earlier church. In South Kerry, most of the monastic sites founded in the early centuries of Christianity had been abandoned before or around this period. These were replaced by parish churches and a small number of abbeys. Among the latter were Ballinaskellig's Abbey, Riain Abbey and Innisfallen. Of course, there would have been many parish churches built during the later medieval period, the ruins of which are in most graveyards around the countryside. Interestingly, both Ballinaskellig's and Innisfallen were run by the Augustinian canons. They seem to know how to make important religious sites function. As mentioned, Innisfallen gained a reputation as a centre of learning, hence the tale about Brian Boru being educated there. The Augustinians no doubt took advantage of this reputation and worked to increase it. Innisfallen was within the lordship of Desmond, Desmooin or South Munster. It was near enough to Muckross Abbey, where the MacCarthy lords were buried, though some MacCarthys were buried in Innisfallen, though perhaps not after the construction of Muckross. It is now time to turn to the Annals of Innisfallen, the most notable work produced in the abbey. They covered the period between 433 AD and 1450. However, they were not completely written in Innisfallen. Initially, they were probably written around 1092. All the entries before this, from 433 to 1092, were written in the same hand. Where they were written is disputed, with both Emly and Lismore being suggested. Then they may have moved to Lismore, and after some time come to Innisfallen around 1130, or slightly later. In addition to the period between 433 and 1450, there's also a part which deals with the prehistory of Ireland from the 5th century BC to the 5th century AD. It's a magnificent gem for such a small island. Unfortunately, these annals are not in Ireland. Rather, they are held by the Bodleian Library in Oxford. They can be read translated into English at the wonderful UCC Celt site. The late 16th century was a period of great change in Ireland. This would impact Innisfallen. As was the fate of so many religious houses around Ireland, the English break with Rome and the reign of Elizabeth I would signal its end. In 1582, Elizabeth ordered the closure of the monastery and granted it and the island to Richard Cullum. By the end of the 16th century, it had come into the ownership of Sir Valentine Browne. He was noble riche, coming to Ireland as a minor official and gaining from the tumults that appeared to become rich. His family gained much land that had been held by Gaelic lords, especially the MacCarthy Moors. His family would become baronets, viscounts, and eventually the Earls of Kenmare. Like many of the Elizabethan noble riche, this family would profit from the horrors of the 16th and 17th centuries. Now, let us turn to look at the buildings on the island, the ruins of Innisfallen Monastery, once a great centre of learning. It consists of 3 main buildings: the abbey itself, a chancel and nave church, and a smaller oratory. We'll start with the oratory. This is near the northeast shore of the island. It is a small, single-room building measuring externally 7.2 metres by 5.15 metres, and internally 5.44 metres by 3.4 metres. Its walls are around a metre high. In the centre is a stone cross on a stone plinth. This was actually discovered in a lake nearby and placed here. The most impressive part of the oratory is the carved sandstone Romanesque doorway. This is decorated in what is called the classical Hiberno-Norman style with chevrons and animal heads. It dates to the 12th century, but other parts of the building may go back to the 10th. Bizarrely, in the 19th century, it was used by Lord Kenmare as a banqueting hall. He also further damaged the building by putting in a bay window and a fireplace. These have since been removed. The largest building in the complex is the abbey itself, known as the Priory of St. Mary. This consists of both the abbey church, the cloisters, and some outlying buildings. It differs from the usual designs of abbeys in Ireland, since the cloisters, etc., are to the north and the church to the south. While this was unusual in Ireland, it was the layout used in the famous St. Augustine's Abbey in Canterbury, an interesting model to follow. The church consists of a nave and chancel, measuring 22.4 metres by 5.2 metres internally. In addition, the western 2/3 of the nave were formed from the remains of an earlier church, possibly dating from the 10th century. Some elements of the 10th century church remain, such as ante, which help date it. However, the Earl of Kenmare or others may have done some so-called restoration work here, making it hard to properly date the different parts. On the west is a large 2-light or twin-light window. In other words, it consists of 2 large window sections or openings. Unfortunately, this window is damaged. Various cross slabs and grave slabs can be found within the church. North of the church is the remains of the cloister. This was once a covered walk around an open courtyard called a gart. Alongside this is what is called a range, or what is left of it. This was a series of buildings consisting of dormitory, library, dining hall, etc. There was probably a second floor. Many of the walls of the cloister and gart are damaged, and some of them were rebuilt in the early 20th century. Further north of this is a kitchen building, where the remains of the oven can still be seen. 10 metres west of the abbey is the last building, referred to as the Abbot's Church. This consists of a nave and chancel church. The nave measures 9.3 metres by 6.95 metres externally, and the chancel 5.15 metres by 4.7 metres. A reconstructed Hiberno-Romanesque arch separates them. This arch contains some interesting carvings, including one to be St. Fionn. There's a lot to explore in these buildings. However, after seeing them, I would also recommend exploring the island. It is beautiful with some lovely views and, if you are lucky, some deer. Innisfallen is a very interesting and fascinating place. It was a religious site for almost 1,000 years. Starting as what would probably have been little more than a hermitage, it grew enormously, becoming famous and rich. It suffered for this, with raids by Vikings, Gaelic lords and others. The important Annals of Innisfallen were produced there. However, the 16th century resulted in its abandonment. It is now ruined, and despite the efforts of some of its owners in the 19th century, it is still a beautiful place. More than this, it is an interesting window into the past, giving us a fascinating glimpse of the role of these monasteries in Gaelic Ireland. Thanks for watching. Please click like, leave a comment, subscribe. It really helps. And if you can help more, my Buy Me a Coffee account is in the notes. I hope you enjoyed the video and one day get to visit Innisfallen. Slán.